Dot. CSS architecture, BEM, SMIS, OS. CSS architecture refers to the way in which CSS is organized and structured in order to improve maintainability, scalability, and reusability. There are several popular CSS architectures, including BEM, SMIS, and OS. 1. BEM, Block Element Modifier. BEM is a naming convention for CSS classes that helps to create modular and reusable code. The basic idea behind BEM is to create independent blocks of code that can be combined and reused in different contexts. A block is a standalone component of a website, like a navigation menu or a button. An element is a part of a block that has a distinct function, like a button's text or icon. A modifier is a variant of a block or element that changes its appearance or behavior, like a disabled button or a highlighted menu item. BEM class names are written using a specific syntax, like block_element modifier. 1. SMIS, Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS. SMIS is a style guide for CSS architecture that emphasizes modularity and scalability. The main idea behind SMIS is to separate CSS into 5 different categories, or modules, based on their level of specificity and importance: base, layout, module, state, and theme. Base styles are the default styles for HTML elements, like typography and color. Layout styles define the overall structure of a page, like the grid system. Module styles are reusable components, like buttons and forms. State styles are variations on module styles based on user interaction, like hover and active states. Theme styles are variations on all other styles based on branding or other design considerations. 1. OS, Object-Oriented CSS. OS is a CSS architecture that focuses on separating structure from skin. The basic idea behind OS is to create reusable and flexible CSS components by separating them into 2 categories: objects and abstractions. Objects are reusable components that have a specific structure, like a grid system or a media object. Abstractions are styles that apply to multiple objects, like padding and margin classes. The main goal of OS is to create flexible and reusable components that can be easily modified and combined to create complex layouts and designs. CSS selectors and specificity. CSS selectors are patterns that are used to select and style HTML elements. There are different types of selectors, each with a different specificity level, which determines which styles will be applied to an element when there are multiple styles targeting it. Specificity is a way to determine which CSS rule will be applied to an element when there are multiple competing rules targeting the same element. There are 4 different types of selectors in CSS. 1. Element selectors. Select elements based on their tag name. 1. For example, P selects all elements. 2. Class selectors. Select elements based on their class attribute. 2. For example, my class selects all elements with class equals my class. 3. ID selectors. Select elements based on their ID attribute. 3. For example, #myid selects the element with it equals myid. 4. Attribute selectors. Select elements based on their attribute values. 4. For example, type equals text selects all elements with type equals text. The specificity of a selector is determined by assigning a value to each of these types of selectors. The more specific a selector is, the higher its value. The specificity of a selector is represented by 4 numbers, 1 for each type of selector. For example, the selector h1 #myid.myClass has a specificity of 0, 1, 1, 2 because it contains 1 ID selector and 1 class selector. When 2 or more rules have the same specificity, the last rule in the style sheet takes precedence. However, when one rule is more specific than the other, the more specific rule takes precedence, regardless of its position in the style sheet. For example, a selector with a specificity of 1, 0, 0, 0 will always override a selector with a specificity of 0, 1, 0, 0. In general, it is best to avoid using highly specific selectors, such as ID selectors, unless necessary, as they can make your styles difficult to override or modify later on. It is recommended to use class selectors instead, as they are more flexible and reusable. CSS transitions and transformations are powerful tools that allow web designers to create dynamic and engaging user experiences on their websites. CSS transitions allow you to smoothly animate the transition between two states of an element. For example, you can use a transition to animate a button when it changes color on hover, or when it expands or collapses. Here's an example of a CSS transition that animates a button when it changes color on hover. Button. Background color, blue. Transition, background color 0.5 at SEs. Button hover. Background color, red. In this code, the transition property tells the browser to animate the background color property over a duration of half a second, using an ease timing function. When the user hovers over the button, the background color property changes to red and the browser animates the transition smoothly over the course of half a second. CSS transformations, on the other hand, allow you to manipulate the shape, size, and position of elements on the page. For example, you can use transformations to rotate an image, scale a button, or move a menu off-screen. CSS layouts and positioning. CSS layouts and positioning are techniques used to control the visual arrangement of elements on a web page. CSS provides several ways to position elements on a web page, including normal flow. Elements are positioned in the order they appear in the HTML code. This is the default positioning method for elements. Relative positioning. Elements are positioned relative to their normal position in the HTML code. This can be achieved using the position relative CSS property. Absolute positioning. Elements are positioned relative to their nearest positioned ancestor. This can be achieved using the position absolute CSS property. Fixed positioning. Elements are positioned relative to the browser window and will not move when the user scrolls. This can be achieved using the position fixed CSS property. Here's an example of a CSS transformation that rotates an image. Transform, rotate 45 degrees. In this code, the transform property tells the browser to rotate the image element by 45 degrees. You can use other transformation functions, such as scale, translate, and skew, to achieve a wide range of effects. By combining CSS transitions and transformations, you can create complex animations and interactive experiences that engage and delight your users.